We have learned a lot, alhamdulillah, giving da'wah collectively for the last few decades in this land. And I want to begin by actually talking a little bit about my own experiences. So I grew up in the 80s, and the first exposure I had to quote-unquote da'wah was none other than Ahmed Didat and the Didat videos, which I'm sure many of us in this audience are very familiar with. And alhamdulillah, I even met Sheikh Didat a few times, and no doubt he was a type of influence on me. At the same time, watching Sheikh Didat's videos gave us a type of presumption about da'wah that I think needs to be corrected in hindsight. He did a great job, may Allah bless and reward him, but a lot has happened since 1985. And we have been collectively giving da'wah in this part of the world for almost a generation now. And the impression that we had, the impression that I had definitely, and I know I speak on behalf of many people, was that all that we needed to do was to have a strong personality, good debate skills, and solid arguments. If you had solid arguments, and you could take on these Jimmy Swaggarts and all of these other people out there, then the whole world will convert to Islam once they hear of your solid arguments. And if we could only go to a training school by Sheikh Didat and come out mini replicas quoting, scripture and whatnot, then وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا, all of mankind would convert. But you see, in my particular case, I actually did go to study at university. You start giving da'wah, and you realize that no one converts. You preach and you teach, you talk and you give lectures, months, years go by. And the people that you're talking to, by and large, they don't convert because of your da'wah. They don't convert because of your solid arguments. In fact, the people who convert have nothing to do with you. They come because they're interested in something else, and they track you down, not the other way around. And they knock doors on your masjid, and they say, such and such happened, I'm interested in Islam. Now that they're this close, then you come into the picture and you speak to them a week, a month, and then inshaAllah ta'ala you give them the shahada. But it wasn't your didat arguments that converted them. It wasn't your solid, 2-second clips that you memorized because you attended the Saturday Ikna workshop with Shaykh Yasir Qadi. That had nothing to do with it. Rather, they're already intrigued, they're already curious for something else, and then they come to you with a different mindset. And I think that we need to, it's about time, and again, this is the first time I'm also teaching something to this frankness, but I think that it is time that we move beyond the platitudes, move beyond the cliched responses, and got to some real psychological issues of da'wah. Because the fact of the matter, dear Muslims who are attending a da'wah workshop, if solid arguments and good personality were enough to convince the world of the truth of Islam, the Quraysh would have been convinced of the Prophet ﷺ as soon as the Prophet ﷺ opened his mouth with the kalima. But was that the case? If all you need was to attend a training workshop and to be spoon-fed the right answer and to have the solid argument, could anybody be better than our Prophet ﷺ? If all you needed was to have a good hujjah, Ibrahim alayhi salam had the best hujjah, وَحَاجَّهُ قَوْمُهُ. And did his people convert after Ibrahim's hujjah? It did not happen. And therefore, we need to actually have a very, very frank reorientation about how we're giving da'wah and what is the best mechanism for giving da'wah. And remember that even our Prophet ﷺ, it took him 23 years of constant preaching, and even then, it wasn't his arguments that won the Quraysh over at the end of the day. It was the political conquest of Mecca. And even then, it wasn't his arguments that won the Quraysh over at the end of the day. It was the political conquest of Mecca. It was the political conquest of Mecca that eventually caused the leadership of the Quraysh and the people of Mecca en masse. وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. And ironically, dear brothers and sisters, even at the conquest of Mecca, those leaders converted grudgingly. They did not do so willingly. Abu Sufyan to the very end, and those other leaders, it wasn't an immediate acceptance. And when they converted, they were in a gray area for a period of time, as the books of Seerah mention. And it took a while. Even Allah mentions those who converted at that time. وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. Iman has not yet entered your hearts. So if converting people and giving da'wah was as easy as memorizing 2-second responses to the shubuhat, to the arguments that come, then the whole world would have been Muslim for 14 centuries. We need to get rid of this mindset. Because what happens is, my dear brothers and sisters, when we have this simplistic mindset, what happens is when we start giving da'wah and nothing happens, at the very least, our own gets deflated. Like, what's going on? Why aren't people coming to Islam? I'm saying what I was taught to say. These are the responses I was told. It will dampen our own enthusiasm, our spirit to give da'wah. So we need to be very, very frank here. Strong arguments by themselves will never win converts. Solid logic in and of itself will never gain hundreds or thousands of people converting to Islam. There's only a very, very small segment of mankind where intellectual arguments works with them. A very small slither of mankind. And those people are already searching for the truth. They're already looking for answers. And they're typically coming to you, not the other way around. They're already in a mindset where they're wanting to search for the truth. And tell me honestly, what percentage of mankind are that courageous and brave that they're willing to break away from their tradition and they're trying to find the higher values of truth in other traditions? It's a very, very small group of open-minded, intellectually courageous people who are willing to think through everything. We also need to be aware of some of the psychological problems of giving da'wah to others. I'm going to mention 2 or 3 primary issues that we should all be aware of, because we don't want to dampen our own spirit. We don't want to, astaghfirullah, even harm our own iman. And I have met people, a'udhu billah, that they have given da'wah for decades or years, and then they get so frustrated that they even just lose track of religiosity. They just stop doing anything because what they thought would be useful, they didn't see the impact of what they thought would be useful. They had a different mindset coming in. So I want us to be aware of some of the psychological issues when we give da'wah. And by the way, we are coming to the seerah, don't worry, it's going to be here. But I find it highly problematic, and if you want me to teach you, I'm not going to just jump to the specific, because in my humble opinion, that wouldn't be doing the topic justice. I would not be doing the topic or you justice by ignoring this simplistic mindset. So I want us to be aware of certain psychological problems that we as da'is face when we're giving da'wah to our people. The biggest problem that is mentioned in the Quran, and our psychologists fully understand the technical term for it, or the mass term for it, is groupthink. Groupthink. This is the biggest problem. And it is a technical psychological term, groupthink. You can call it social conditioning. Groupthink is when you are born and raised in a group, you will think like the group. It's very simple, right? When you're born and raised in a group, you will think like the group. And you will assume that that's group's relative orientation, standards, mechanisms, mannerisms, culture, theology, everything that you associate with your own group, that is automatically the default. That is where you begin looking at the whole world through the lens of your own group that you have happened to be born and raised amongst. So, psychologically, this is well known, and that's why the Quran mentions every group said the same thing to their prophets. Who are you? Our fathers did this. Our culture did this. Who do you think you guys are? Right? And I've given many talks about modernism and progressive Islam and whatnot, and the same issue applies to us having been born and raised in this culture. We absorb the values of this culture. Our second generation, third generation, they absorb the values of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and they think this is the default. Those of us that have lived through that, we understand and we see these changes going on. So the point is that we need to be cognizant of this issue called groupthink and understand it is very, very, very difficult to persuade someone to break away from the group. And in fact, the fact of the matter, at some level, we are all guilty of groupthink, even in the most innocent or the most innocuous manifestations. If all of us are guilty of these things, do you think when it comes to big issues like theology, we can understand them because of an intellectual argument? I'm trying to express to you how difficult it is for a human being to break away from the construct they happen to be born and raised in, to break away from the social norms, from the values that they happen to be raised in. Do you really think a 2-minute argument to defend our religion is going to make sense to somebody born outside of it? We need to get rid of this mindset from our own minds. We need to be more mature about da'wah and understand you can't just spoon feed somebody in 2 seconds. It's not going to work. How do you think you're going to explain the seerah and the problematic issues of the seerah and morality and culture of the Prophet ﷺ in a 2-minute clip? It's simply not going to happen. So the first thing to be aware of is groupthink. The second thing to be aware of is something that psychologists have called in-group bias. In-group bias. In-group bias basically means, and again, we're all guilty of it. These are things, there's nothing wrong with it as human beings do this. In-group bias, as the term implies, refers to the fact that you are always biased towards your own group. And you make excuses for your own group. And you look positively at your own group versus those who are outside of it. And again, there's nothing wrong with this. It is human nature that what your group does, if the same thing were to be done by somebody outside, you would problematize it. But when it's done by your side, your people, your group, in your minds, you find a justification. Right? Now, why is this important? Because we are the other when it comes to this society. And things that our religion has done, or the Prophet ﷺ has done, or has happened in the Sahaba's time, this is not in-group bias. We have in-group bias. When we look at those things, we find an easy justification. From our paradigm, it makes sense. But realize, if the same things had happened against us, we would have not found justification for those things. And there's nothing wrong with this. It's human nature. In group bias, you do it. And the point is that whoever you identify with, you will always look at in a more sympathetic light. And whoever you think of as the other, as outside of you, you don't identify it, you will dismiss, you will criticize, you will exaggerate. If you can't get two people of the same skin color and the same Christian religion to understand, do you really think you're going to get a brown-skinned Muslim from the Middle East or Pakistan and somebody to really understand the tactics of 1,400 years ago? We have to be pragmatic and realistic and stop telling ourselves fairy tales. You cannot be taught a 2-minute response that will solidly refute some of the issues of our seerah against those who criticize it. So my point is, the reason I began all of this, moving on to the issues of the Prophet ﷺ and the seerah, is that I really want us to understand, to stop being told these fairy tales of whatnot, because it's not going to work. I need to be frank and bluntly honest with you. It is totally impossible to defend each and every accusation against the seerah in 2-minute sound bites. Anybody who tells you otherwise, with my utmost respect, is in a fairy tale land. I'm not trying to be too harsh, but this is the reality. It is impossible to be spoon-fed and to be taught to memorize nice little packets of information that you think once you debate with a non-Muslim, no matter who comes your way, now that you've taken Shaykh Yasir Qadi's class, or if Ahmed Didat were alive, or Zakir Naik tells you chapter number 22, then immediately you're going to go and khalas, give him the right and knock him out. Life doesn't work that way. And if anybody were to have done that, our Prophet ﷺ would have been the most successful in that way. My dear Muslim brothers and sisters, there is a reason why the political strength of Islam followed the ideological and theological conversion. If you understand what I'm saying. If you don't, then think about it. There is a reason why the borders of the Muslim world today are essentially the borders of the Umayyad and Abbasid and Ottoman empires. Groupthink. When groupthink is positive, it's great. You want to keep it that way. Excellent. When groupthink is for Allah and His Messenger, alhamdulillah, it's great. When groupthink is the opposite, it's a problem. It really is a problem. It's a problem for us. It's a problem for our children. It's a problem for da'wah. And by the way, please don't quote me Malaysia and Maldives and whatnot. Please don't say, oh, look at those. Because firstly, they were exceptions. And secondly, do you know how those exceptions occurred? How did Malaysia become a Muslim land? How did the Maldives become a Muslim land without the political dominion of Islam, get what I'm saying here, reaching them? How? Do you know? I'm asking you. Yes. Trading. That's what they teach you in Sunday school. MashaAllah. Your whole knowledge of Islam comes from Sunday school. Oh, high school Sunday school. MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Okay, alhamdulillah. Excellent. Their rulers converted to Islam. When their rulers converted to Islam, the people were essentially socially forced to follow. Sometimes politically, by the way, but socially forced to follow. Even Malaysia and these other nether regions of the world, the conversion, it is, yes, you're technically right. We're only taught, as usual, Sunday school does teach you these positives that help us. But again, if you listen to my lectures, you realize, and maybe I'm being overly cynical, but my dear brothers and sisters, because of the internet, we don't have the luxury to be in our beautiful bubble anymore. Because of the internet, I am strongly against ignoring the bigger problems out there and just teaching these half Sunday school myths, because maybe because of who I am, but I have experienced too much disenfranchisement from the next generation. I have talked to too many people who have left the faith of our own children, and they say to me, we were taught lies, we were taught truths, it's not correct what we were taught. And I therefore, because of all of this, you will not hear me, maybe I don't know, maybe you're used to other types of philosophies, and all the best for them. But if you want me to teach you as you have asked me to teach you, you're going to hear me blunt and raw, this is who I am. It doesn't work, my dear brothers and sisters. Nobody can teach you these little snippets that you will then become super da'wah man. Doesn't work that way. The fact of the matter, da'wah is a very, very, very dry and tough field. And most of the people who convert, they already are interested in conversion. They just need the fine-tuning. They come to you. So we talked about two issues. The third issue here, the psychological issue. And that is, what do you, and there is no term for it, I'm just going to explain the phenomenon here. What is our perception of the seerah versus their perception of the seerah? When I ask the average Muslim, when I talk to the average Muslim and I say to them, describe for me the Prophet ﷺ. Or I ask the average Muslim, tell me your top 5 incidents from the seerah. What do you think they're thinking about? All of you yourselves think about them. Describe the Prophet ﷺ. You're thinking of his mercy, of his smile, of how he was loved to the Sahaba, of. When you talk about the incidents of the seerah, you're going to think about the Ta'if one and how he withstood it. You're going to think about Makkah and how he forgave. And alhamdulillah for that. That's who we are. But we need to be intelligent enough to understand when we give da'wah to other people, do you think that is the image they have of the seerah? See, here's the point. We have a disconnect. Our narrative of the Prophet ﷺ, our image of our Prophet is totally disconnected from their image. Completely disconnected. They have been taught. Now, let's ignore the lies, okay? Let's imagine there's an educated man amongst them. Even though there are usually a lot of lies. You know what? Actually, these days it's half-truths. It's not even lies. Maybe 100 years ago would have been majority lies. I would say these days, public awareness has increased to the level that everything they know about our Prophet ﷺ, it's not an outright lie. It is, they've chosen this, that. Oh, the massacre Banu Qurayza, they said, right? Or married to this many women. And they construct an image of a person we don't even recognize. But when you go and look at what made that image, point after point, a lot of times these points are valid, right? It's just a matter of what do you emphasize, how do you construct the image versus how do they construct the image. So when you look at it, it's as if we're talking about two different, entirely disconnected characters. Our image of the Prophet ﷺ versus their image. And for now, let's assume their image is based out of half-truths. Let's say that there's no lies amongst them, which is not rare, neither is it common. But let's just suppose that everything they have, it comes straight from our seerah, straight from Ibn Hisham. They could construct an image that is so radically different from ours and yet still based upon our books and our tradition. So do you really think then that a 2-second clip out of one of those issues is going to solve all of the problems? Now they could argue, we will say, oh, their image is distorted. We will say, you've only chosen those aspects. How will they respond to us? What will they say to us? Number one, why do those aspects even exist? Number two, you've also picked and chosen. Exactly, right? You see, we have to be intellectually honest enough to say this, right? They will say to us, firstly, even if we chose these 10 points, why do these 10 points exist? They're problematic. You are telling us he is rahmatan lil alameen. You are telling us he is qudwa. You are telling us he is the role model. Well, if he's a role model, even if it's 10% of his life, explain that 10%. And isn't that a valid understanding from their perspective, right? And then the flip side, we say to them, you're biased. They say back in return, so are you. You've also picked and chosen your issues and you've ignored these ones. So my point with all of this, and again, maybe because of who I am, but I can't sugarcoat this. I have to be brutally honest with you because I want you to understand da'wah is not so simple. You go knocking on doors, you preach to them, give them a pamphlet, and then they're going to convert. We've done this, been there, done that. I did this when I was 17 years old in Houston, and now I'm in my 40s. It doesn't work. And if anybody tells you otherwise, I'm sorry, but they're lying to you or they're mistaken or whatever. Da'wah, generally speaking, is a dry field.